Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to continue on with our series, and we're going to use these add dialog box. We already built the form in the previous video, so now what we're going to do is put in the mechanics to capture this information, update the SharePoint list for the client vehicle list, and then hydrate our gallery so that way the end user can see the latest and greatest that they just added to the collection. A lot to unpack here, so let's get started. Okay, so welcome back. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the next step of our installment for the, I know the video series calls this the CRM series, building the CRM with Power Platform or Power Apps and Power Automate. But in actuality, this is the ability to manage clients. So this is more of a client management system for those who purchase Tesla vehicles from a dealership and associating the client to the dealer and then the rep at the dealer that helped them with the purchase. And we have all these lists over here to manage that. Now, here we have in the client list, we have the client detail, we have the engagement information, which ties them to a dealership and then a rep. And then we have all the vehicles that the client actually purchased. And if we go into edit mode, you will notice that we get this add placeholder. And in the previous video, we built out the form, but once we click save, it will not add the vehicle. So we can put in the fake VIN number, click save, and then we go back into for that particular client, and the vehicle is not here. So that's what we're going to solve in this video. Now, just to remind ourselves of the relationship, because once we get into the Power Apps Studio, it's going to be important to understand which list do we want to save data and how do we relate lists. Because so you're going to have a parent and a child list. The parent is going to be the client, the child in this scenario. We got several either child lists or lookup lists. The child list in this scenario is going to be the client vehicles. And this is going to create a one-to-many scenario. So you can have one client that has many vehicles. And if you look at the schema for client vehicles, it's really straightforward. Notice how we were able to save that information for that particular client, and we're missing a lot of key information because of the lack of validation. All of that we're gonna resolve in this video. But the key piece, even if we're saving this data and we're missing like the model and color, delivery date, the key piece of data that we cannot miss is the client ID, because that saving a client vehicle, saving one of these vehicles without the client ID really just creates an orphan record, right? So now we have a vehicle that's floating in limbo, and we have no idea which client that's tied to. So we're going to resolve all of those, and that's the purpose of this video. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is go ahead and launch this form, Power App form, within Power Apps Studio. Okay, so once I'm in Power Apps Studio, let me just go ahead and zoom in. And what we want to do is, I really love working with Power Apps Studio in one tab and the actual list in the separate tab. So I'm going to just go to my data source, click on the client data source, and click edit data. Power Apps Studio will automatically launch that in a separate tab for me. Same browser, separate tab, which is super convenient. Okay, so now what we want to do, let's go ahead and navigate to our screen vehicles, or vehicle screen. A little tongue twister. And if you recall in the previous video, we set up a lot of these sample items that we kind of use during build, and we're going to hide them once we're ready to go live. But clicking the collection test button hydrates my gallery for this particular client ID, and it's bringing back data. So if I click on add, this is the screen, this is the dialog that we saw in the SharePoint view. So let's go ahead and inspect our save button, because really it's going to be the save button that does the magic, that's going to save the client vehicle information and tie it to the parent record, which is the client record. And right now, as you can see here, if I expand out this form client, you would notice I don't have the client ID record to capture the current client ID, right? So in the child record, I need to make that reference, and that's going to be my foreign key relationship. So let's go ahead and solve that first. So the first thing we want to do is select the form, and then click on Edit Fields, and let's just bring on the table the client ID, right? So let's go ahead and bring that on the screen. And I'm showing this, and I'm going to set this. Basically what I want this to always be the default value of the current client ID, right? And that current client ID, the current record, is going to come from this main form, so form main. So let me go ahead and select this. And if I inspect all the data cards on the form main, notice that I am not referencing or bringing in or showing, right, the ID, which is an auto-generated number for us. So to solve that, with this selected, edit, let's go ahead and bring that on the screen. And this is going to be the ID. And now once we have that, I want to use the value that's passed into my client ID formula. I'm sorry, client ID site column under the vehicles form. So let's just rename this, and this is something that I've learned to do. This is one of those disciplines you learn anytime. The rule of thumb is this: anytime that you're writing a formula and you reference another field, control, component, what have you, that's within your solution, always give it a friendly name. We should not have formulas that have data card key 18 or data card value 22. Because looking at the formula, you have no idea what that data point reference. So this is an opportunity for us to give it a friendly name. So let's just call this a VID. And then V is just for, this is just a value, right? And I kind of use these interchangeably. And I have this weird subtle difference when I would prefix this based on the control type. So like TXT ID or DD ID if it's a drop-down list. And in other scenarios, I use it if it's just, the V of the value, meaning that it wasn't modified. So in my scenario, in my head, I cooked this thing up that said, okay, if it prefixed with a V, then that's just a value, and I did not alternate that. So that's a value that's coming straight from the site collection. I'm sorry, the site column on the list. All right. So here I just go to Screen Vehicles, go back to my Save button, and let's go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm not in the Save button yet. Let's go to the Client ID, and let's go ahead and save the this as the default value. So with that component selected, I need to change this from parent.default to be that VID. So in order to change it, I have to unlock it. Go ahead and do the VID.text. That's going to bring in the text value. You may be wondering, okay, you're dealing with strings or text values. When and how does this get converted to a number so that the SharePoint site column does not spit up? And this is actually done for us because in this view, because we're dealing with a text box control, Power Apps will automatically convert any text to a value. And that's actually done on the update property on the data card. So if you go to the data card and look at the update value, this is the magic statement. And we get all that for free because Power Apps know that you're interacting with data and you have to use the text control. So it's no guarantee that you're going to put in the number. So to make the save safe, try saying that 3 times, they wrap any text value in the value function, which will always return a number. Okay, so that's how we're able to do away with that. All right, so let's just keep this reference. Let's go back to our form, our SharePoint list, our form in our SharePoint list, and see if this guy saves now. And again, we're doing all of this to prevent an orphan record when we're interacting with this vehicles dialog. So let me go ahead and give it a couple of refreshes here. So now I'm on my add vehicle dialog. I do not see my client ID. That means I have more refreshing to do. So let's see if this would be the 3rd one. Okay, so now that I'm here, I see the client ID being referenced there. If I go to a different record, let's just do Frederick Hill. Its ID is going to be 7. On the vehicle screen, go ahead and click Add, and then that client ID is going to automatically update to 7 for me. All right, so let's go ahead and add in let's just do a white Model X. Let's just give it a fake VIN number here. Then a year, let's give it a delivery date for the 20th. Assign the rep and all this other information. Now, Obviously, as the end user is putting this in, or the administrator who's managing this client purchase solution, we don't want them to mess with the client ID. Again, we just have this visible for dev purposes. So once I save that and go back to Frederick Hale, go into vehicles, you would notice that I have the white Model X, which is awesome. All right. So now I can continue here and then click add and then continue on building this out. All right. So let's go back to Power Apps Studio, go into a client ID. Let's go ahead and hide that. We're done with that. We don't need that to be displayed. Also, remember that in the form main, we brought in this ID. Let's hide that as well. We want those fields to be available in the backend because the ID is obviously hydrating or showing the automatic generated number. And then our vehicle is going to use that to relate the client vehicle record to our parent record, and now everything is as it should be. Looking at this experience, there's a couple key things that are not correct. When I go to add a vehicle, so let's just say a red Model 3, and after I put in all the information, you would notice that when I click this Save button, instead of just closing the dialog, it saves it, but it closed not only the dialog, but the form as well. I could be in there. All I want to do is add a new vehicle, but I may want to go to the history step and do continue updates, or I may want to go to the engagement step and do some other updates. So when I click out of the save from that dialog, I actually want to land here in the gallery, see my recent change, and then continue on or explicitly save that form to close the dialog vehicle. So let's look at understand why that's the case. And it's not going to be obvious, and this is something that we had kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit. So under the client form, if you inspect this, when I click the save, let's just look at the save button. I'm going to walk through these steps because you may run into this issue, and hopefully just understanding what some of these functions are doing and how they trigger other events and how that may impact your experience is really good to understand this cycle or this flow. So when I click the save button, I'm submitting this form. And when I submit the form, what that actually does, if the form is valid and I look at the form component, it actually triggers an on success event. Only if it's valid. And that's the key, right? So if it's valid, it's going to trigger this event. If the validation fails, it's going to trigger this event. And if we reset the form, it's going to trigger this event. So and we're doing a little bit of everything, right? So we're resetting the form that says, okay, the data has been sent to SharePoint. We assume this saved. I'm sure that's some validation or something. Maybe there is, some maybe there's not. But I guess at this point you assume it's saved. Then you reset the form, meaning that you're going to clear all the values out. And then this is the key piece. This is why we're closing the entire Power App form. We're calling this request to hide. And I know exactly how that got there, right? And that goes back to how we built these screens out. We took the shortcut, which is fine. Just understand that what you get when you do shortcuts. We took the shortcut where we built this screen main, and that actually had the form main. And then we duplicated that screen, which kind of brought in that whole layout plus the form and then dropped it in there. So we actually may have that issue with other forms. So if I look at form engagement as an example, and then look at the on success, see, this is going to be a problem. The only time we want to close the Power App form is when we're on the last step, especially when you're in this type of sequence. You're on the last step, you click save, and you say, okay, go ahead and save all of my forms, and then request hide to close things out, right? So, and again, so this is one of those things where you really understanding the anatomy of the form component and understanding how some of these out-of-the-box functions work, like submit form or edit form or view form, all those out-of-the-box functions that we get for free, understand what they're triggering and what other events that may come after them is a key component. Okay, so once we remove that from our on success event for the form component, now we can submit that form, which actually saves it to the client vehicle list, and it won't close our Power App form. The next thing we want to do is set some default values. So you would notice that when you're interacting with this add form, this add dialog, these values do not make sense. So we have a cascade drop down that's based on the model selected. And again, look at the previous videos if you missed this. There's a lot of magic that went into selecting the model and then filtering the colors based on that selected model. And all of these models and color combinations are actually managed in a separate list. So you're really creating these drop downs, this cascading drop downs based off of list data and list data lookup mapping, right? So go back to the previous videos to check those out. But the one issue that we have with model color and dealership is that they're defaulting to the 1, and that's just something that Power Apps does for default drop down components. So we can easily change that by going to the drop down, selecting the default property, and just remove this all together. We can go ahead and clear this all the way out and do the exact same thing for dealership. Now, if you go to clear that out and it's grayed out or it seems like it's read only, just make sure you unlock the data card, and that's going to give you access to that. Okay, so now we have that clear out. The last thing we want to do is set some required fields. So for model, this should always be required. The year should be required. Delivery date should be required. And then the rep should be required. So to set all of those, we just need to set a property on the data card. Notice the distinction, right? Some of these properties you want to set on the data card. Some of these properties you have to click into the component themselves to set. The rule of thumb is if it's something that impacts everything, set it at the parent if that property is available. Require is one of those properties that are available at the parent, and it just propagates to all of the components, the child components within that data card in this example. So in order to do it, and let me show you a quick way to do this, because when I first jumped into Power Apps, I was thoroughly confused of having 3 different ways to set properties. And me personally, I always gravitate to the drop down, mostly because I can get a lot of real estate to really compose really nasty formulas when and where needed. So I use this the property drop down in the formula bar a lot to set a lot of formulas. Quick and dirty, especially when I'm dealing with colors and background colors and things like that, I tend to use the property pane over here on the right. Hardly ever, and this is the one scenario where I use this more often than not, do I go into the Advanced tab to set properties for the data cards and components. The benefit of using the Advanced tab in this scenario is that I can find out, like imagine if visible was all the way down here and I wanted to set the visible property for each one of these. Notice how I can jump from data card to data card and that visible property remains consistent or static for me in that list. The same is true for requirements. So basically you just scroll to the property and then you can easily jump between the different data cards, and then in batch, well, as close as you can get to a batch. Now what I can do, set all of these to true. I'm gonna just copy that, pop over to year. Oh, this needs to be unlocked. Unlock it here. Pop over to here and delivery date. Unlock it. So just a quick and easy, dirty way to do these in batches. And that's probably the only true value I see having that Advanced tab. Again, everything that I can set here, I can set here. But, you know, having this conveniently static position and then allow me to touch each and every one of these data cards and setting the value is a true gift, and it would just save you a few keystrokes. All right, so I think we're good. So we got our default value issue selected. We have our requirement field selected. And we think we resolved the issue with this save button closing the entire form more than just the dialog. I think we have all that selected. So let's just go ahead and save what we have and then go ahead and test this out. Okay, so after 3 to 4 refreshes, I kind of have all of this wired up, and I knew I was done with my refreshes because my client ID no longer displays here. So now just to test my validation out, I hit save, and you can see the validation is kicking in. So let's go ahead and resolve the validation. Okay, so I have all my information submitted, click save, and it didn't close the form. So you got to pat yourself on the back for that one. But then again, I'm not seeing the latest and greatest pop up in my gallery. Now, if I come here and click refresh, so let me just refresh the browser, go back into James, go back into vehicles. Now I see the red Model 3. Okay, not the best experience, but it's functional, but it can be extremely confusing, right? You don't want that. You don't want your end user adding information, right? So I'm adding all of this information, click and save, going to the screen that they originally were at before the change and not see their change, because any end user would naturally go through that process again and refill that information just to notice that the data is still not there, and then do a refresh or do something, come back to it, and then see 3 or 4 records because they're, it was captured, they just didn't get the refresh. So we need to solve that from a usability perspective. So what's happening here, let's just explain. And again, I like to go into in depth, not really just solving a problem, but understanding why you're having a problem, because you're going to run into this in other scenarios that may not be a direct reflection of what we're doing here. But because you're understanding the techniques and what's happening under the hood, you know exactly where to start looking to resolve it. Now, what's happening here, let's look at it's all in the save button, and it's really, we need to do some additional work. So we're submitting the form, and basically what's happening is writing the record to our list. Now, to confirm that, and again, you should be doing this, right? These are steps that you take to confirm, like, okay, is it really saving data? I actually have the last modified column. Let's just bring this over so I can see it without having to scroll. And these are recent timestamps, right? So it's like, okay, my data is actually being saved. That's the right client ID. The only thing I'm missing really is a refresh. Or if you refreshing it, you're seeing this, okay, why does that cost me a refresh each and every time? I want that kind of like a SPA, right? Single page application where things happen and your screen magically updates with the change. Now, so this part is doing its job, and understand that we do have a validation check or a litmus test to say, I'm only going to proceed with closing the dialog and ... if the form validation passes. And that's what this if statement is going to do here. What we need to do is refresh our collection in our gallery. And what does that mean exactly? So if I hold down this cancel, this is our gallery. So we just added a new record, and when you refresh the data that this gallery is using to populate, and we know that data is going to be under this items property, and we got very fancy, right? We got very fancy with building this collection on the edit event to get the right client data for items in the SharePoint list. And and this is more than just a filter against the list, right? Because we also need to add the add placeholder for the user to use this to add additional records, which is kind of forces down this customization. So that's going to be on the on edit. Again, this was all established and agreed, and the thought process was all in the previous video. So, and that's what I'm doing. I love YouTube and I hate YouTube. I love YouTube in the sense that we're able to share and collaborate in this way in the public forum, on the social. I hate YouTube in the sense that I build these in a series, and usually after watching one of my videos, it recommends something else from either my other video that's not related to the series or someone else's video that may be related to this topic, right? It's just YouTube trying to be very helpful. In our case, it's not helpful. So what I've done and what I will start doing is for each and every video, link to the playlist, and it's better for you to play my series through the playlist, because that way the sequence is in order. And because I do a drip strategy, meaning that I don't build all these videos and then publish them. I build them one at a time, like it really in a incremental fashion. So as soon as I have it, I give it to you on that following Tuesday. So because of that, it's probably best to look at the playlist, and that'll give you a really good sense of where I am in the playlist as far as providing the content, and it allows you to track your progress if you start from video 1 and then work your way up through video 20 as an example. So from here on out, let's just start using the playlist to view these videos, and that will ensure that things are in sequence. I say all that to say, oh yeah, if you don't understand why this exists, just go back to the previous video. All right, so let's go to our save button. And what we need to do is replicate everything that we're doing on that on edit, right? So I want to close this dialog, and then I'm gonna just paste in this formula. And basically all this is doing is hydrating this collection, really clearing it out. So if there's any residue, first thing I want to do is clear it out. And then it's getting the idea of the current list item, the parent item. And then it's going against this client vehicle list and doing all the filters, storing in the collection. And this is our add placeholder, right? So we did a special record that's unique from all the other records, gave it a flag that says is true, is new is true. And the gallery knows that when it starts to paint these records out, to put our placeholder when it come in contact with a record that has this value is true, right? And that's what needs to happen here. So every time we add to the collection or add to this list, which is what this submit form is doing, we just need to rehydrate the collection so the gallery can show the latest and greatest. All right. And this is going to be problematic. This is fine for now, but imagine if we had this monster solution in Power Apps. You cannot duplicate this in several different areas. It becomes a maintenance nightmare. Well, a maintenance frustration, maybe nightmare is too strong of a word. So it becomes a maintenance frustration because what's going to happen is that over time, this logic is going to change, right? You may have to do more than just filtering by client ID, and you're going to change that in one spot, and in one use case or scenario, it's going to work. It's going to look great. And then you start testing other parts of the app, and this is not going to work, right? Because it's dealing with another copy of that logic. As any great solution or as any architect, as a great architect, what you want to do is centralize all your business logic into one function. And that becomes a gap because there's no such thing as functions. We got global variables, but we don't have global functions or reusable functions in Power Apps. So there's this old trick, the timer, spoiler alert, that we kind of use. And then in the future video, we're going to collapse all these instances of this logic into a single one. So that's coming up. All right. So now that we copy that, let's just go ahead and save and see if this works. Okay, so here we are in the vehicle details. What are we missing? We don't have a Cybertruck here. So let's add a Cybertruck. And we're going to put this as a 2025. This thing is always being delayed. All right, so we got the Cybertruck in there, 2025 delivery date, and Blue Ash location in Fort Ashley. All right, so now I save that. And as you can see, this is the best user experience, right? So I made a change, I did an action, I added the item, and once I go back to my gallery, I can see the added item in addition to everything else that we have. All right, so now what we need to do in the upcoming video, let's talk about the problem that we're creating. And I'm taking this natural path and this knee-jerk reaction on how to solve some of these problems, because this is what most of us would do trying to solve this situation, right? This is actually a complex situation, but a very common scenario. And I would say complex situation in what we've done, though it works, it actually falls apart when you're creating a brand new item. And the reason for that, notice what we're hinging our client vehicles off of. We're hinging our client vehicles off of the automatic generated ID for this client record. And for brand new items, this ID is not generated until you actually save the client record. So if we go in this scenario, and if I go new and put all this new information in. Okay, so I put in a brand new client detail, and then on the engagement screen, and I put in the basic information, and now I'm on vehicles. And when I go add, and I hate that I hid that now, but when I go add, I'm gonna go ahead and put in Cybertruck information. All right, so I have everything situated, and now I click save. And notice what happens. I click save, and this thing is thoroughly confused. It just brought me a bunch of vehicles out of nowhere, right? And the reason is that this, on a brand new record, this whole client ID scenario is not a record until it's actually saved. And there's a couple ways on how we can solve this. Now, this may not be an issue if you're saving things as you go along the way, right? But if you are building this scenario to where I'm really just capturing this data and I don't have like a saved draft scenario, this is an all or nothing scenario, then basically we need to do a lot of things in memory, meaning that if I click cancel, I should not see that Scott record. And then if I go into the client information, I should not see this record. It look like it's defaulting to client 1, which is, that's an error. That's a data error, right? I'm creating this brand. No, actually look like the client is empty. This thing is playing tricks on me. I don't know what it's doing, right? So the client ID is empty because our new record, we didn't have a client ID created yet. And that's a really complex scenario to solve. And it's not really complex to solve. It's just one of those things that if you go full speed down one path and you discover like every scenario works except for the brand new, like the new record scenario, then it forces you to unravel some things in order to fix it, right? It's almost like you put an engine together and then you realize that once the engine is finally put together and you test it, that you can't go over 45 miles an hour because of a screw that's missing at the, like at the core. And then you have to undo a lot of stuff just to get to that core, resolve it, and then you're up and running. The good news is I'm showing you this scenario in the next video. Yeah, let's tackle this in the next video. We're going to solve this scenario in the next video. And that way, when you go to build your next solution, you know exactly, which minefields or mines to look out for as you're building that out. Okay, so that's what we're going to tackle next. We're going to have to undo a few things in order to get the use case of I have a brand new record, and as I'm going through, I need to tie vehicles to that brand new record before I even save that record to SharePoint. So how do you solve that? All right, so we're going to solve for that in the next video. Any questions or any comments, please leave them in the comments in the comment section. Hopefully this was helpful on how you kind of tie your vehicles to your child record to your parent record. There's errors there's a fundamental issue with that process, and we're going to solve that in the next video. All right, until then, I'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.